It's not your fault. It's your faith. This is part 3 of our series. And I am just going to begin reading at verse number 27 and go to verse number 32. And it reads, "Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land, and they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall." Again, as we are here this morning, and it's not your fault, it's your faith. We are navigating through this series, and as you and I have been able to ascertain and obtain great insight into this chapter in understanding that what the Apostle Paul and those with him who are on this ship, they are going through not just your average storm, not just your everyday storm, not just a typical storm, but this storm is one that is extremely unique in that this storm is unpredictable. It is also unpreventable, and it is also unpreparable. This storm, known as the youre, which is given its name in verse number 14, this storm for many of us is something that those of us would recognize as we have heard over many years as storms being categorized as a 100-year storm. It is not something that generally will happen in your lifetime. It is a storm that you can't predict when it will show up. You just know at some point that it will. You don't know how it will show up. You just know at some point that it will. You don't know where it will show up. You just know at some point it will. The youre type of storm is something that you and I have been able to identify something like this in our lifetime. I'm sure that you can look back over the past few years and you can put your finger on a storm that has transpired that you remember exactly where you were. You remember exactly what you were doing. You remember exactly what day it was like when this storm approached. It was one that was not forecasted. It was one that was not on the news and the weatherman couldn't tell you how to prepare. It was one that would show up and the tornado alarms and the sirens wouldn't alert you. It would be one that would catch you completely off guard. The youre is one that you and I can identify with. I specifically can look at a storm and say right away what comes to mind in my mind, the life-changing storm would be one known as Katrina. I know that there are others, but Katrina is one that comes right to the forefront of my mind. To me, Katrina would be symbolized or typified as a youre. It would be one where those would know a storm was coming because of the way the weather pattern was going. they could identify that Euroclydon like this, a storm like this, was not going to do as much damage. I can remember all the way back on the West Coast at the time in Las Vegas when this storm was rolling in as a tropical storm, not a hurricane, but as a tropical storm. This in and of itself would be one that would catch everyone in the region off guard, because it was those who were preparing for it to be just like any other storm. They figured it would build up to being a hurricane, but they didn't figure it would be one of a major onslaught that it was. Many would decide that in this, that it would be best for them to, hunker down and prepare and to go out and get food and to get water and to make sure they have batteries for flashlights or whatever the case was in order to ride out this storm. But we would later find out that Katrina, i.e. the Euroclydon, would do something that they would not expect. And when I say they, I am referring to those who are in direct line with that storm's pattern. They would see that as the storm would get closer to land, it would build up its momentum. It would increase its wind. It would increase its terror. And then it would fan out even further than what others would expect. It would be only at the last moment that those who thought it was the typical storm would not be prepared for what would come their way. This Euroclydon that we have been reading about and been studying about and been learning about is identical to Euroclydons that many of us never expect to happen in our own lives. There's that one thing that you would never have guessed that it would have wreaked the type of havoc in your life. You thought the storm you were having or experiencing or going through was just like any other storm. You would prepare just like every other time. You would anticipate that it would be a little turbulent, it would be a little unstable, it would be a little unpredictable, but you did not expect that it would throw you off kilter. It would completely throw you into a tailspin. This storm is not like any other storm, as those who are on the ship are used to storms. They're used to the waters being rocky and unstable and shifting and causing the ship to go back and forth, to sway back and forth. But this storm is a unique storm. It is one that no one on the ship could prepare for. This is the type of storm that you and I can identify, at least some of us right now in our lives, where we're trying to identify the storm that we've been in. And it seems like this storm is not willing to quit any time soon. It's amazing that anytime you're going through trouble, anytime you're going through instability and unsurety, it's amazing how slow time gets. It's almost as if time stops. You can almost count in your mind how long it is lasting. You even forget about the best parts of your life prior to the storm, because to you, what's happened in the past has now become irrelevant. This storm that the Apostle Paul is a part of doesn't have his name on it. It doesn't belong to him. However, he is going to partake of it. There are storms in our lives that we love to, as human beings, claim as our own storms. What I'm going through is my storm. What you're going through is your storm. We like to categorize them and take ownership in those storms. But I'm reminded today that it is incumbent upon us to understand that these storms that we're encountering were never intended to belong to us. They were never intended to be just for us. The enemy has gotten us so predictable at this point that he knows that if he sends something that we cannot prepare for, and something we cannot predict, and if others aren't around, it's something that we can't prove. Others would not believe what you've gone through in your life had someone not been able to witness what you've experienced. Many would believe that you are exaggerating in what you have gone through in your own life or what you are currently going through. In this text, we find that this storm now has gone on for 14 days. Keep this in mind. This is not just an average storm. It rains here in Dallas. It will rain maybe one whole day or a half a day and maybe part of the next day. And we know that when the day gets gloomy, we feel as if there's nothing we can accomplish or we desire to accomplish. When the sky is gray, it makes us feel as if the best thing for us to do is to find a quiet spot and to just wait it out. This storm is 14 days and they're still growing and going along with it. It says that in verse 27, says as they were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, said it was about midnight when all the sailors, those with experience, can do was sense land. They could only sense that they were near some land. They couldn't tell, but they could sense that they were close to safety. They could not identify it. They couldn't see it because the storm was so emboldened that it would cause them not to see it, but couldn't stop them from sensing it. You and I are having this dilemma because we can't see safety, but we can sense safety. You and I, at our most frustrating times in our lives, could not pinpoint where calmness was, but we could sense that calmness was close. It is our nature to want to see what we need to believe. We need to be able to see what we need to trust. But these men with experience, they could sense. There's something about being able to sense where you are, but you may not know where you are. And many of you know I am one who is terrified of heights. Anything beyond 7 feet, I am terrified of being up that high. Here's something about what fear does. Fear gives you this other sense that when you are used to being out of your element, it gives you a sense, though you may not see it, it allows you to sense. I don't have to see that I am in a space that is above the second floor. I don't have to see it, but I can sense it. My body reminds me through its experience what it feels like to be up off the ground. Some of us are in this same plight. You know trouble when you not only see it, but you can sense it. You have this nose for sensing when trouble is close to you. In this text, the soldiers sense that there is land, but they can't see it. The only thing is, with sensing and not seeing, you have to make the adjustment in how you're going to deal with just your senses. It says they were out there for 14 days. And verse 28 says that they took soundings in order to prove their senses and test their senses. They would take measurements. They would drop this tool down into the water, this instrument down into this water. Whatever type of tool it was, whether it was a rope, whether it was some type of measurement tool or whatever it was, they knew what to use in order to gauge how close or far they were from land. It says that they wanted to try their senses, and they let down the measuring apparatus, and they took their measurements and found that they were just 20 fathoms, which would be, in our terminology, 120 feet. There's 120 feet deep water where they are. This is proving that the ship is not running short on its ground territory, that they still have some give and some take with the ship. And it says that when they had gone a little further, they had let down and checked again, to take soundings again, to take measurement again. And it says that by this time they had at least found it to be 15 fathoms, which in our term would be 90 feet. They're finding that they're getting closer to safety, but yet so far away from it. It says that then, fearing lest they should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern. And they dropped 4 anchors. I want you to see this, because when they dropped the anchors from the stern, this is the rear of the boat, not the prow or the bow of the boat, but from the rear of the boat. This is not a normal procedure. This is an emergency procedure. This is one where they want to stop it right now. This is heartbreaking, where they don't drop just 1 anchor, but they drop 4 anchors to ensure from the rear of the boat that the boat doesn't get any further. I read this and I became enamored. I meditated on this, and as many times as I've read this, not being a mariner and not being a boater, not owning a boat, not having the privilege of riding on a boat all the time, in this I was enamored because the Bible is emphatic in pointing out that they dropped 4 anchors and wanting to ensure some level of consciousness of where they were and not wanting to run the boat aground. It says that they dropped these 4 anchors at the rear and prayed for day to come. You know, and I know what this is like in our own lives when all chaos is just breaking out, when you feel that you can't control your circumstances, that even though you're in the front and trying to navigate, you can't see what's really in front of you until it's too late. It's in this that many of us struggle in our own lives because we've been so used to navigating from the pilot seat, only to discover that God has switched positions with you. God has taken us out of the pilot seat and moved us into coach. He's not even allowed us to even co-pilot. He's moved us out of the cockpit of our own lives. God has taken us out of the steering capacity and put us in the viewing capacity. In this place, they drop 4 anchors in order to try to prevent what they believe is going to destroy their lives. At least something as quick as dropping 4 anchors and stopping the ship right where it is, trying to minimize the damages that they are incurring. I am fully aware of what this is like. I am fully aware of my capacity to try to stop my life from the rear. How I can revisit my past. I can revisit past circumstances, past occurrences, past dilemmas, and hope that what's in the rear will stabilize what's going to happen up in the front. Though the rear of the ship is anchored, the front of the ship is still in its turbulence, being maneuvered by the wind and the waves. It may not be going forward, but it is swinging left and right, up and down. It is still in a state of instability. These professionals know exactly what's happening, but they can't do anything to stop it. Says that in this, verse number 30 is an amazing part, because when they realized that just stopping the ship wasn't enough, they resorted to something that you and I are very familiar with, which is when you can't control anything, is you pray for daylight to come. You pray for the sun to come out. You pray for peace of mind. You pray for hope and an expectation that God is going to be there when it's all said and done. Said in verse number 30 that as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea under the pretense of putting out anchors from the prow or the front of the boat. Listen, what they did is that the soldiers who were on the ship, who understood what was happening, were in the back, but the sailors were running the ship. And the sailors understood that this was bad. They understood that this was something that they weren't willing to go through. they were in a place where they felt that out of all the people that are on this boat, we ourselves can at least save ourselves. Though everyone on the boat may die, we have something in our control that they don't, and that is this skiff. Only a few of us can get in this, so let's do something to get in it and hope nobody else knows the plan. Verse number 30 is clear. If you read it too fast, you won't get the grasp of really what they are saying and what they are doing. But what it says, as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, that's those who know how to steer it, and those who know how to control it, and those who know how it operates, those who are experts. It said when they had let down the skiff, nobody knew it, into the sea, they were secretly letting the lifeboat down into the sea under the pretense of putting out anchors from the prow. The sailors were pretending as if they were going to the front of the ship to throw off anchors, when they had fully planned to make everyone believe they were doing one thing when they were going to do something completely different. Everyone else on the ship, the soldiers and those that are prisoners, are trying to hold on for dear life, only to discover, as the Apostle Paul is very aware and keenly tuned in to those who are trying their best to fake their way as to being with everyone else. These are the people who are pretending to be with those who are in trouble, but have made a plan to escape. We've talked about this a couple of weeks ago. This is that plan B. This is that plan that you know that you have in your back pocket just in case things fall apart. Listen, during a Euroclydon, or that one storm, that 100-year storm, that one that you can't predict, that one that you can't prevent, that one that you can't prepare for, this is that storm that you and I find it still hard that we can't seemingly get it under control. How can I navigate through this? How can I manage my family through this? How can I manage my marriage through this? How can I manage my career through this? Many of us, as we see the news across the country and around the world, but in particular in this country, as we see a Euroclydon type of chaos, we are looking to stabilize this ship in some kind of way and make out some type of normalcy and try to come to grips in some type of way where we can manage what's happening. And we're finding that this thing is out of our control. This life is out of our control. We can't just simply stop it by begging and pleading with one another to have some sense and compassion for one another. This is a Euroclydon for us. It's a Euroclydon for you when the trouble that you're experiencing is one that you have stopped all the presses in your own life. You have stopped everything from moving and hoping that when you stop it, it will stabilize your life. And at this point, suffering with what you're going through is the least of your concern. You're used to suffering, just not this kind of suffering. You're used to trouble, but not this kind of trouble. And you find that the people that you believe are with you are the people who are also looking for another way to escape what is absolutely happening in your own life and those that are around you, and they want to be detached from it. This is what is happening in this text, where these sailors say that at this point, we know this kind of trouble, but only a few of us can escape this wrath. So they pretend to help only themselves. It's in this text that as they have secretly let the skiff down into the water and mimicking doing the work as if they are going to let the anchors down, they are preparing to jump overboard. You and I, we know what this is like. We've experienced this. We have had some trouble, and hoping that the people that are with us, the people that are on the same ship as we are accepting the challenge to navigate through this storm. You know, the ones that says, I'm with you. I'm praying for you. I'm supporting you. I care. Only to find out that at some point that the type of trouble you're in, nobody wants to be associated with that trouble. They don't want to be involved in that trouble. They pretend to let the boat down, pretend to throw over the anchors with the idea of jumping in. And it's at this point that the Apostle Paul turns to the centurion in verse 30 and says to the centurion and the soldiers, he says, the sailors are jumping. He says, but unless these sailors stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. If you let the experts get away, you cannot be saved. He says, if the sailors jump, the soldiers and yourself cannot be saved. Then the soldiers run over to the sailors' position and cut the skiff away, aborting their plan B, aborting their plan to save themselves, aborting their comfort, causing them to remain in the ship. It says the sailors at this point have no other sources to believe or trust. There's no other lifeboats on board, and so all they could do is trust the circumstance. In your life and my life, it's difficult to embrace what God is allowing to happen in our own lives. Time and time again, our lives are interrupted by Euroclydon type of storms. These are the unpredictable ones. You and I have had these plan Bs and these plan C's and D's throughout our lives, and it's in this that we have to resort to the same thing as they resort to, is to just pray and wait. I'm going to say this, that in your life and my life and all of us, none of us are exempt. That when God's credibility is being established in your life. It is being established through chaos and calamity, and not the calming comfort of still waters. It's ideal for us that these storms that we've gone through in our lives that only caused a little instability, only caused a little turbulence, we know how to navigate those. We never really needed God for those. And it's in this where God says, you need me and only me. No one else is going to be able to convince you except me. Though this may be out of your control, it is still in mine. Though your emotions may be running crazy with you, I am still in control. Though you may feel as if all hell has broken loose, all heaven is rejoicing, just wait for day. I'm reminded of this scripture, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I've always said that your night may be a month, maybe a year. For some, a night is more than 1 year. They're many years. But your morning is coming. I'm going to say this and close. We struggle each and every day of our lives trying to hold on to the peace we had on yesterday, reliving what life was like yesterday, reliving what life could be like tomorrow, if only God would cooperate. And we're finding that God is not cooperating with us because we're not cooperating with him. This ship is doing something that you and I must get accustomed to doing, which is allowing life's waves and wind to keep us in a place where we know, I probably don't have my footing as much as I would like, but I'm going to trust God at this point. I'm going to hold on to what God is doing. I want to acknowledge that I am no different than you are. When you think you know what God is doing, you find out that you absolutely don't know what he's doing. All you know is that he's doing. But we must trust what he's doing.